Hello and welcome back to the Chaos Standard Podcast. I'm Uncle Flacco and I'm so glad you've joined me here today. And before we get into today's topic, I have an announcement for you guys. Recently, everyone's favorite benevolent dictator, Mason, has recently been promoted to Server Dictator. And with that new responsibility and other IRL things happening, he has decided to step down from being the format TO for Chaos Standard. And in its place is a young, spry, and enthusiastic Flacco. That's right, it's me! I'm the new TO. And I promise to do about as good of a job as he's done. This should mean absolutely no changes for you guys. The only change is that it's me sitting at the top instead of him. The way that we roll formats, the way that we decide bans, the way the tournaments are run is all going to stay exactly the same. And with that out of the way, it's time to introduce today's episode. We have Format 8. I can't believe we're already at 8 formats. And with the new format comes new sets. We say goodbye to Time Spiral, M12, and Guilds of Ravnica. And joining Cold Snap, Born of the Gods, and Dominaria United are Guild Pact, World Wake, and Eldritch Moon. And joining Sheoldred the Apocalypse on the ban list are Jace the Mind Sculptor and Emrakul the Promised End. And with all that out of the way, it's time to discuss the new format. The place that we usually start is with the lands, so I will go over most of the interesting lands in the format. The first thing to note is that the mana fixing is very uneven. From Guild Pact, we get the Orzhov, Izzet, and Gruul guilds. From Dominaria United, we get 6 of the 10 Pain lands. And from Born of the Gods, we get 3 of the temples. In addition, we also have World Wake with the 5 allied colored man lands. And with all of that combined, we get some color combinations with incredible mana fixing and some color combinations with absolutely no mana fixing at all whatsoever. Actually, that's not strictly true. Dominaria United also gave us all 10 typed dual lands, the ones that enter tapped. So color combinations like black and green and red and white get that land specifically, and they also get like Crystal Grotto. I would recommend not trying to make exactly 2 color decks in either of those color combinations. I would recommend playing a third color, but all of the other 2 color decks are going to be anywhere from decent to great. In addition to the man lands, we also have Eye of Ugin with some expensive Eldrazi, a combination which will come up later on when we are discussing decks. But in order to counteract the man lands and Eye of Ugin is another card from the same set, Tectonic Edge. It takes a little while to turn on, but once it's on, it turns into almost a wasteland, which is really good. Decks that can afford to play Tectonic Edge will absolutely play Tectonic Edge and be completely chillin'. In addition to those, we also have stuff like the Bojuka Bog cycle, which includes cards like Conley Garden and Halimar Depths. There's also all of the snow stuff from last time, which we'll get more into later, but the first deck that I want to talk about is the, in my opinion, clear front runner for the format, and that is black or black-white stuff. There's a lot of different things you can do, a lot of different directions you can go with black and white, but the real core of the deck comes down to 2 of the scariest planeswalkers ever printed, Liliana of the Veil and Liliana Last Hope. Both cards being in the format means that you have incredible turn 3 plays across the board. Creature removal, discard, win conditions. The cards do a lot, and they have a lot of really good support behind them, both in terms of the mana base. Black-white fixing is really good, and there are a lot of really good removal options in those colors as well. Now, the reason that I didn't specify a macro archetype and just said stuff is because you can go a lot of different ways. Lupine Prototype is a very good reason to go more aggressive. Archangel of Wrath is an incredible mid-range card, and cards like Cruelty of Gix and Debtor's Knell make sure that your control deck goes over the top of anything that could be thrown at it. And it's also a really good reason to play Bojuka Bog. Now, how do you beat something like this? Well, you make sure to play a deck that doesn't care about discard all that much. Plus, we also have Nephalia Drownyard to help with repeated discard shenanigans. If something like a Liliana of the Veil is upticking on you, you're not going to feel as bad when you're discarding Nephalia Drownyard over and over and are allowed to keep that one card in hand. Next up, Snow. We're going to discuss this in the next episode, I'm pretty sure, but Snow is incredibly powerful. It was played a decent amount in the last format, probably actually more than almost any other deck that has been played ever in this format, and it's not very hard to see why. In particular, red-white with things like the sweepers and spot removal options pair really well with Scrying Sheets, being a land that's able to draw cards. And on top of all of this, we now have man lands. Things like Stirring Wildwood and Lava Claw Reaches do dilute the power of Scrying Sheets, but they improve the mana base overall, giving something else for mana to sink their teeth into. In addition, since you are trying to be a slow control-y deck, there are very powerful sweeper options, things like Temporary Lockdown, Drown in Sorrow, and even Chain Reaction. I know that Chain Reaction has historically been a little bit of a trap, but when you don't really have any other options, then the format now has to warp around it. You're going to have to, in your aggro deck, only play out one or two different creatures, because if you extend too far, then Chain Reaction is going to be able to get rid of the entire board. Or if your deck only plays cards that have 1 or 2 toughness, then you're not going to want to play anything into a red deck that could possibly have Chain Reaction. And like I mentioned earlier, Tectonic Edge being able to get rid of some of the more powerful utility lands in the format is a little bit of a hit to this deck. Not only because any non-snow lands you put in your deck are going to make Scrying Sheets worse, but also if you get rid of the one utility land they have, then they're playing off the top of the deck effectively to try and win the game, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. It just changes the math a little bit. The next deck I want to bring up is Not Gruul, Then Die. Any sort of aggro or mid-range deck based on green stuff. There is a really powerful play in this format. With the introduction of Worldwake comes Arbor Elf, and with Guild Pact comes Stomping Ground. This is going to be one of the more powerful turn 1 plays in the format, and will allow a turn 2 play of things like Burning Tree Shaman, Fanatic of Xenagos, even Leatherback Baloth. And all of this can go into something like a Defiler of Vigor. You can even use this in sort of like an Elves style deck, which we might be talking about Elves in the next episode as well. But yeah, in general, some very strong things you can do with Arbor Elf plus Stomping Ground, and I hope to see how that evolves. But a deck I'm more excited to see evolve is Ramp. There are a ton of different directions you can go for Ramp. I know that Domain Ramp was talked about a decent amount, but I didn't really see anyone go for it. I'm hoping that since it is rotating out next format, that a lot more people will try and figure out the deck. And the deck has some really good top end as well. Like I mentioned earlier, if you get even one copy of Eye of Ugin, you are allowed to tutor up a lot of late game plays, and those late game Eldrazi will be discounted by the Eye of Ugin. Additionally, the introduction of Explore means that you can play Explore in combination with things like the bounce lands that tap for multiple mana and extra land drops to ramp up your mana while not having as many actual lands in your deck. This means that you have things to do with your mana more consistently, making the ramp deck better. Maybe we'll see something like a cheeky Elder Deep Fiend package in a ramp deck. I think that would be very funny. But time will tell if the ramp deck is good or if it is very good. And finally, a deck that I want to throw out there for all the people who like playing bad decks. This deck is one that has been pretty bad in the past, but I believe could actually see a decent amount of success in the upcoming format. And that deck is Defenders. Dominaria United pretty infamously has a Defenders deck built around Wingmate Chaplain. And while that is certainly one of the win conditions you could put in a deck like this, it's certainly not the only one. Plus, Zendikar block in general, but specifically Worldwake, does have a decent amount of defenders and defender support in it. All of this combines to make a pool of defenders that is actually pretty extensive and not the worst you've ever seen either. And this deck also doesn't really die to a sweeper necessarily. There are sweepers that could definitely mess you up, but unless you are getting chain reaction after you play a Wingmate Chaplain, you're probably going to be okay. I will say, though, if you do get your entire board swept, you probably aren't coming back. So maybe you actually don't play the Wingmate Chaplain. And finally, to wrap up this episode, I want to give you a couple of different combos. The first combo relates back to the ramp deck, and that is Bounce Lands plus Amulet of Vigor. Amulet of Vigor is one of those cards that has committed a lot of war crimes in Modern, but doesn't really do much outside of that, because decks that are built around Amulet of Vigor really suffer when they don't draw it. For a ramp deck, Amulet of Vigor is really good because it can help you ramp faster, but not drawing Amulet of Vigor isn't the end of the world either. Also, of course, drawing multiple amulets with the bounce lands means that you are just rocketing ahead in mana. Next card I want to bring up is Allosaurus Rider. This is a 7 mana value creature that you can play for free by exiling 2 green cards from your hand. One of the things you can do with this is combine it with an Eldritch Evolution into a Terastodon. It's certainly a lot of resources to dump into it, but if you're getting Terastodon on the battlefield turn 3 or turn 4, you're probably just winning the game. You are destroying your opponent's mana, and in return, you are getting a 9/9? That probably wins the game. In addition, because Allosaurus Rider is a elf, you can actually use it in an elf deck. You can pitch cast Allosaurus Rider and then use it to emerge a Decimator of the Provinces. This is one of those retrains of Craterhoof Behemoth, and it would only cost 2 mana if you casted it this way. So you would be able to play a gigantic dude for 2 mana and you would win the game. Again, both of these are incredibly resource intensive, but very cheap on mana. So I'm excited to see if anyone will do that. This next combo is very near and dear to my heart. It involves the card Hatching Plans. Now, Hatching Plans is 1 and a blue for an enchantment, and it reads, when this card goes from the battlefield to the graveyard, you draw 3 cards. It's a 2 mana draw 3, but sacking enchantments is surprisingly difficult to do. So this card has never really been broken. But in this format, we do have a particular braids that you can use to sacrifice enchantments. Most of the times how this will play out is you will sack your Hatching Plans to braids, your opponent will not be able to sack back, and you just get to draw 4 in your mostly black deck. You're probably winning that game. And there are other benefits to going blue as well, including Urtai and Creeping Tar Pit. So maybe splashing blue in your mono black Liliana tribal deck is a good idea. The next combo I want to bring up is Stoneforge Mystic. So Stoneforge Mystic doesn't grab too many good equipment in the set, right? Good equipment is really a modern invention and not one that is present in any of the sets that we have. The best thing that you can grab off of this is actually something from Worldwake itself, Basilisk Collar. Death Touch and Lifelink are very good keywords. Death Touch being good for smaller creatures, and Lifelink being good with bigger creatures. The combo comes in with just any creature that can tap to deal 1 damage to any target. I wonder if we have any of the... Oh my god, it's Cunning Sparkmage. What? In all seriousness, tap, kill a creature, gain a life is really good. And unfortunately, Cunning Sparkmage is red and Stoneforge Mystic is white. But I could imagine someone playing some sort of maybe a Mardu mid-range deck that has these small creatures in it. Maybe they're running Naya so that you have better mana fixing and a little bit more top end. The possibilities are endless. And finally, I want to bring up Panglacial Worm. Not because there's a combo per se, but just a reminder that the card exists. And yeah, that'll do it for today's episode. Please, everyone, write All Hail King Flacco down in the comments section, and any dissenters will not only be banned from the comments section, they will be permabanned from UOL. Anyways, that's all I have for you. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.